The unexpected encounter. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to another life-changing true story. Today I bring you a tale that is filled with warmth, emotion, high drama, and a message that will inspire you deeply. Before we begin, let us take a moment to reflect and pray together. Heavenly Father, we come before you with humble hearts, seeking your love, wisdom, and guidance. Bless every soul listening to this story with peace, joy, and strength. May these words bring light into their lives, fill their hearts with kindness, and remind them that no matter how ordinary life seems, miracles often wait around the corner. Protect us from negativity and open our eyes to opportunities, even when they come in unexpected ways. Amen. On a crisp autumn morning in the bustling heart of the city, the glass doors of Sterling Enterprises swung open, welcoming employees into another demanding week. The building stood tall like a monument of ambition, its steel frame glistening beneath the October sun. Inside, floors buzzed with quiet urgency, assistants rushing with files, interns clutching coffee cups, and managers buried in discussions. Yet for Gabriela Martinez, this Monday felt strangely different. She had been part of Sterling for 3 years, serving as a marketing coordinator, and while she excelled at her work, she had always preferred to keep a low profile. To her colleagues, she was reliable, diligent, creative, and professional. But beneath that calm exterior lived a young woman who carried insecurities, quiet dreams, and an unspoken longing for something more than routine. Her life had fallen into predictable rhythm. Arrive at 8:30 sharp, sip her morning coffee, answer emails until noon, brainstorm campaign strategies in the afternoon, and quietly leave by 6. She was respected for her talent, but invisible outside her department. Gabriela often wondered if this was all her future held. Unnoticed dedication, polite applause, and a paycheck that barely stretched to cover rent and bills. Yet she never complained. She believed in gratitude, in working hard with honesty, and in holding on to faith that one day things might change. That day, change walked through the front doors in the form of Nathan Cross, the new CEO, the young, elusive millionaire whose reputation preceded him. Stories had already spread through the office like wildfire. He was brilliant, ruthless when needed, but also known for unconventional kindness. Some whispered he had built companies from scratch. Others claimed he had walked away from wealth only to return with sharper vision. Whatever the truth, when Nathan Cross stepped into Sterling's headquarters for the first time, everyone felt it. Tall and lean, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that carried authority without arrogance, he moved with a quiet confidence. His dark hair was effortlessly styled, his posture upright but not rigid, and his eyes, deep blue with a piercing intensity, seemed to command both respect and curiosity. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice carrying across the open lobby with warmth and certainty. "I am Nathan Cross. I look forward to walking this journey with you, building not just numbers but something meaningful." His words, simple yet powerful, made even the most seasoned executives pause. Gabriela, who had paused near the coffee machine to stir her sugar, felt her heart thump louder than usual. She reminded herself he was simply another man, albeit one with power and presence, yet something about him unsettled her. It wasn't just attraction. It was the way his gaze seemed to search beyond appearances, as though he was reading character rather than attire. The week unfolded quickly. Meetings were held, reports were demanded, and Nathan made his rounds, personally greeting employees at every level. Gabriela was caught off guard when, during their first team briefing, he called her name directly. "Gabriela, could you walk us through the engagement metrics of last quarter's campaign?" She had done this many times before, but never under the weight of eyes that seemed to notice everything. Gathering her composure, she presented clearly, pointing to growth trends and highlighting future strategies. Nathan listened intently, nodding at key points, jotting notes, and occasionally meeting her eyes with an expression that was not only professional approval, but genuine curiosity. When she concluded, he leaned back with a small smile. "Excellent work. Your clarity makes complex numbers sound almost simple. Keep it up." Those words echoed in her chest long after the meeting. Compliments were not rare, but from him they carried weight. She tried to bury the flutter in her heart, reminding herself that he was the CEO, unreachable and likely unaware of the ripple his smile caused inside her. But fate has a way of weaving threads when least expected. By Thursday, their paths crossed again near the coffee machine. Gabriella stood filling her cup when Nathan appeared beside her, his own mug in hand. "You're here early," he remarked casually. "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Just trying to get a head start on the day." "That's admirable," he said, pouring his coffee black. "I've been reviewing some of your proposals. Impressive work, very creative." Her breath caught at his casual acknowledgement. "Thank you. I enjoy the challenges," she answered, forcing herself not to stare. Standing so close, she caught the subtle scent of his cologne, cedar and spice, sophisticated yet understated. Their eyes met briefly, and though it lasted only a second, it felt like an eternity. She quickly excused herself, leaving with her coffee and a heart racing faster than it should. The following week, life took a turn she never anticipated. Friday evening, Gabriella visited her best friend Chloe's apartment for their usual wind-down ritual. Wine, laughter, and catching up. Chloe had been her confidant since college, bold and outspoken where Gabriella was thoughtful and cautious. They complemented each other like fire and water. As they curled up on the couch, Chloe raised an eyebrow. "You've been distracted lately. More smiles, more daydreaming. There's a guy, isn't there?" Gabriella nearly choked on her drink, then laughed nervously. "You always know." 10 years of friendship, Chloe teased. "So who is he?" Taking a deep breath, Gabriella confessed. "It's someone from work. The new CEO, the millionaire." Chloe's eyes widened. "Gabby, really? Since when do you even notice men like that?" "That's the problem," Gabriella sighed. "I shouldn't notice. But he's different, Chloe. He's smart, funny, kind. Not just to the executives, but to the janitors, the security guards, everyone. And when he looks at you—" She paused, embarrassed at how her cheeks flushed. "It's like he sees more than what's in front of him." "It's unsettling," Chloe smirked. "Unsettling in a good way, clearly." "Go on." Gabriella hesitated, then with the help of wine, words tumbled freely. She described his confidence, his deep blue eyes, the way his presence filled a room. She laughed nervously, then whispered, "And those hands, I bet he's the type who knows exactly what he's doing." "Who could pin you against—" A voice interrupted from the doorway. "Pin you against what?" The glass slipped slightly in Gabriella's hand, and the world seemed to tilt. Turning slowly, she froze. Standing there, framed in the living room light, was Nathan Cross himself. Dressed casually in dark jeans and a navy sweater, his eyes glinted with both amusement and surprise. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Chloe burst into laughter, unable to contain herself. "Oh, I forgot to mention," she gasped between giggles. "Nathan's my cousin. He stopped by to pick up some documents." Gabriella wished the earth would open beneath her. She felt her face burn, her mind screaming at her to disappear. Nathan, however, simply stepped forward with that same quiet confidence. "Well," he said smoothly, "this is certainly an interesting way to get to know my colleagues." Gabriella stammered, words failing her, but Chloe pulled her back onto the couch. "Don't you dare run," Chloe insisted. "We're all adults here. Sit and let's talk." Nathan settled into an armchair opposite Gabriella, his gaze never leaving her. "So, Gabriella," he began, his voice low and steady, "you've been at Sterling for 3 years?" She nodded mutely, her throat dry. "And you've always had such insightful observations about your co-workers?" he asked, the amusement in his voice unmistakable. Chloe laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. Gabriella, mortified beyond belief, buried her face in her hands. "I can't believe you never told me he was your cousin," she groaned. "I did," Chloe protested. "You just never paid attention." Nathan finally rose, retrieving the documents Chloe handed him. Before leaving, he paused, looking down at Gabriella with a smile that made her pulse race. "See you Monday," he said softly, leaning just close enough for only her to hear. "And we'll see if your instincts about me were correct." When the door closed behind him, Gabriella exhaled shakily, her heart pounding so fiercely she could hardly think. Chloe nudged her playfully. "You're welcome. At least now everything's out in the open." Gabriella groaned, hiding her face. "Chloe, you've just ruined me." "No, Gabby," Chloe replied with certainty. "I've just set your life on fire." The aftermath. The weekend following that humiliating yet thrilling encounter at Chloe's apartment was unlike any Gabriella had experienced before. Time seemed to crawl. every hour punctuated by flashes of memory she desperately wished she could erase yet secretly cherished. She replayed the moment over and over, the slip of her tongue, the laughter in Nathan's eyes, the sound of his voice when he leaned down and whispered those haunting words. "We'll see if your instincts about me were correct." It had been both a tease and a promise, and Gabriella did not know which unsettled her more. Saturday morning found her sitting at her small kitchen table, staring at her untouched cup of coffee. The apartment was quiet, sunlight filtering lazily through the blinds, and yet her heart raced as though Nathan were sitting right across from her. Every time she tried to focus on mundane tasks, laundry, grocery lists, cleaning, her mind betrayed her. She would see him again on Monday. There was no way to avoid it. He wasn't just some man she could ghost after a misstep. He was her CEO, her leader, the face of the company. And worse, he was Chloe's cousin. That meant he was both inescapably part of her professional life and, if fate continued its cruel sense of humor, her personal circle too. By noon, Chloe's text arrived like thunder. "Stop hiding. I know you're overthinking. He asked for your last name after you left. You're in his head. Don't panic, this is a good thing." Gabriella groaned aloud, tossing her phone onto the couch. Easy for Chloe to say. Chloe thrived on boldness, on diving headfirst into chaos with a laugh. Gabriella, on the other hand, preferred careful steps, order, control. And what control did she have now? Nathan knew. He knew she had been watching him, analyzing him, daydreaming about him in ways that went far beyond professional admiration. Yet as mortifying as the memory was, there was another emotion beneath the embarrassment. Excitement. She could not deny it. The way his eyes had lingered on hers, the amused curve of his mouth, the softness in his voice when he addressed her directly. It all hinted at something beyond mockery. If he had been offended or dismissive, he could have easily crushed her with a single cold remark. Instead, he had chosen to leave her with mystery, with possibility. Sunday evening was restless. Gabriella stood before her modest wardrobe, pulling out outfits and discarding them in a heap on her bed. She was not the type to obsess over appearances, usually opting for professional but understated attire. Yet now, as she considered Monday, she felt torn. She wanted to look her best without appearing as though she had tried too hard. In the end, she chose a fitted black dress that offered elegance without extravagance, paired with simple pearl earrings her grandmother had given her. She caught her reflection in the mirror and whispered to herself, "You are capable, you are professional, and you are more than your mistakes." Monday morning arrived too quickly. The moment Gabriella stepped into Sterling Enterprises, she felt every nerve in her body tighten. The lobby looked the same as always, employees bustling, elevators chiming, the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the cafe downstairs. But to her, it felt charged, alive with anticipation. She rode the elevator to the 10th floor, her heart hammering with each passing number. When the doors opened, she was greeted with the usual sea of desks and chatter. Yet her eyes immediately darted toward the glass-walled corner office. He was there. Nathan Cross sat at his desk reviewing papers, his profile sharp against the morning light. She forced herself to look away, to walk with composure to her own desk. Her team greeted her with casual smiles, unaware of the storm raging inside her. She busied herself with emails, trying desperately to bury her thoughts in spreadsheets and deadlines. But mid-morning, a message appeared in her inbox. The sender, Nathan Cross. The subject line, follow-up. Her breath caught as she clicked it open. The message was brief, professional, and yet somehow intimate. "Gabriella, I'd like to review your latest campaign concepts this afternoon. Please bring them to my office at 3-1N. The words blurred before her eyes. This was ordinary, a CEO reviewing proposals with his coordinator. It was routine. It was nothing, and yet she knew it was everything. He could have asked her manager. He could have reviewed the files digitally. Instead, he wanted to see her, in person. The hours between 10 and 3 dragged mercilessly. Gabriella went over her campaign documents repeatedly, ensuring every graph was polished, every line of text flawless. Her hands shook slightly as she organized the folders, willing herself to focus on work rather than the memory of his amused expression in Chloe's living room. At last, the clock struck 3. With a deep breath, she gathered her courage and knocked on the glass door of his office. "Come in," his voice called, smooth and steady. She entered, her pulse racing. Nathan looked up from his desk and the hint of a smile touched his lips. Gabriella. Right on time. She placed the folders neatly on his desk. These are the updated proposals, sir. He leaned back in his chair, regarding her with an intensity that made her skin warm. Sir? He repeated, one eyebrow raised. That's very formal, considering the circumstances. Her cheeks burned. I meant Mr. Cross. Nathan, he corrected gently. At least when we're one-on-one. I prefer to keep things less rigid. She nodded, her throat dry. He opened the first folder, scanning the pages with focused eyes. For several minutes, silence filled the room, broken only by the soft rustle of paper. Gabriella stood stiffly, unsure if she should speak or simply wait. Then, without looking up, Nathan said, You're talented, Gabriella. I've seen hundreds of campaign strategies, but yours have clarity and imagination. That's rare. The praise warmed her chest, but his next words made her heart stop. Tell me, do you always analyze your colleagues so thoroughly? Her breath caught. He was referring to that night. She stumbled over her words. I didn't mean to. He finally looked up, his eyes piercing yet calm. Relax, I'm not offended. In fact, he paused, his lips curving into that maddening half-smile. I find it fascinating. You see details others overlook. That's not a weakness. It's a strength. Gabriella blinked, startled. Of all the responses she had braced for, mockery, dismissal, reprimand, this was not one of them. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. Most people look at me and see wealth, power, or status. Very few bother to notice the small things. You did. That tells me you're observant, perceptive, and brave enough to admit your thoughts when you feel safe. That's valuable, both in business and in life. She swallowed hard, unable to find words. Her hands twisted nervously at her sides. I still feel embarrassed, she admitted softly. As you should, he said lightly, though his tone carried warmth. But sometimes embarrassment is the price of honesty. And honesty? He held her gaze steadily. That's something I respect more than polished words. In that moment, Gabriella felt a strange calm wash over her. For the first time since Friday, she allowed herself to breathe. Nathan's reaction had not been condemnation, but curiosity. Rather than shutting her out, he had opened a door. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Their meeting stretched longer than she anticipated. What began as a review of campaign proposals evolved into a deeper conversation about creativity, leadership, and the importance of authenticity in a world obsessed with appearances. Nathan spoke of challenges he had faced when starting his first business, of mistakes that nearly cost him everything, and of lessons he had carried forward. Gabriella listened intently, captivated not by the millionaire title but by the man beneath it, the human being who had battled doubt and fear like anyone else. When the clock finally struck 4:30, she rose reluctantly to leave. Thank you for your time, she said, her voice steadier now. Nathan's eyes softened. Thank you for your honesty, he replied. Not everyone has the courage to show who they really are. As she left his office, Gabriella realized something had shifted. She was no longer merely an employee working under a CEO. She was a woman who had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. And though uncertainty loomed ahead, she carried with her a spark of possibility, the kind that could ignite an entirely new chapter of her life. That evening, as she returned to her apartment and collapsed onto her couch, Gabriella replayed the conversation in her mind. She had walked into his office terrified of ridicule, and walked out with a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in a long time. Nathan Cross was more than the headlines, more than the millionaire persona. He was a man who valued truth, who noticed character, and that realization was both inspiring and dangerous, because deep down, Gabriella knew her story with him was only just beginning. The hidden struggles. The days following Gabriella's private meeting with Nathan were unlike anything she had experienced before. She went to work as usual, took her coffee at the same machine, attended the same endless meetings, yet everything felt altered, charged with invisible electricity. Each time she walked past the glass office that overlooked the 10th floor, she felt her pulse quicken, not because she was merely under the watchful eye of a CEO, but because she had now glimpsed the man behind the title. He was no longer just the mysterious millionaire who commanded boardrooms and filled headlines. He was Nathan, a man who had faced failure, battled his fears, and chosen to rise again with courage and vision. That realization lingered in her heart like a soft flame, warming her in quiet moments and reminding her that greatness often grows from scars unseen by the world. Gabriella had always admired resilience in others, but she had never allowed herself to imagine that someone as powerful as Nathan Cross could have walked through the same valleys of doubt that she knew all too well. It humanized him, made him less of an untouchable figure and more of a living testimony that no one, regardless of status, was immune to life's storms. Yet the more she understood this truth, the more she began to reflect on her own life, her own struggles, the silent battles she had fought without fanfare or recognition. For behind Gabriella's calm and professional exterior was a young woman who carried burdens no one in the office would have ever guessed. Her father had died when she was 16, leaving behind a mountain of debts and a mother whose health had begun to decline from the strain of working multiple jobs. Gabriella had grown up quickly, stepping into responsibilities that most of her peers never had to consider. She worked part-time while studying, sacrificed social outings to care for her mother, and learned to smile through exhaustion. Even now, years later, her evenings were not spent in luxury or leisure but in tending to her mother's needs, managing bills and stretching her modest salary to cover essentials. No one at Sterling knew this, not her colleagues, not her managers, not even Chloe, who, despite being her best friend, had never fully grasped the depth of Gabriella's sacrifices. Gabriella preferred it that way. She hated pity. She wanted to be seen for her strength, not her struggles. Yet something about Nathan's words during their conversation, "Not everyone has the courage to show who they really are," echoed in her soul. For the first time, she wondered if hiding her story was truly strength or merely fear disguised as pride. That week, fate offered her an unexpected glimpse into Nathan's own hidden world. On Thursday evening, Gabriella had stayed late at the office, finalizing a presentation due the next morning. The building was quieter after 7 p.m., the hum of activity replaced by the low buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of vacuum cleaners as the janitorial staff moved through the halls. She gathered her papers, ready to leave, when she noticed Nathan's office light still glowing. Curiosity tugged at her. She hesitated, then walked past, expecting to see him hunched over spreadsheets or on a late call. But what she saw made her stop. Nathan was seated at his desk, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, but he was not working. His head was bowed, his hands covering his face. His usually composed shoulders were hunched, heavy with a weight she could almost feel from the hallway. For a moment, Gabriella considered walking on, respecting his privacy. But then, as if sensing her presence, Nathan lifted his head. Their eyes met through the glass wall, and though he quickly straightened, Gabriella had already seen what few ever would: his vulnerability. He opened the door, offering her a faint smile. "Burning the midnight oil too?" Gabriella nodded softly, unsure if she should acknowledge what she had seen. "I had to prepare for tomorrow's presentation." "And you?" "Same," he said simply, though his eyes held shadows that words could not disguise. "Sometimes the work never ends." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken truths. Gabriella wanted to ask if he was all right, but she knew how pride worked, how hard it was to admit when life pressed too heavily. Instead, she simply offered, "Would you like some coffee?" "I was about to grab one before heading out." He looked at her, surprised, then nodded. "That would be nice." In the quiet cafe downstairs, far removed from the formality of offices and titles, they sat across from each other with steaming cups. Nathan's composure returned somewhat, but his eyes still carried a heaviness. Gabriella, emboldened by the intimacy of the moment, finally asked gently, "Do you ever get tired of carrying it all?" His gaze flickered to hers, sharp and searching, as if weighing whether she could handle the truth. Then, with a sigh, he admitted, "Every day." She waited, giving him space to continue. "When people see me, they see success. They see numbers, acquisitions, growth charts. They see a millionaire, a CEO, a man in control. What they don't see is the cost. The sleepless nights, the betrayals, the sacrifices. They don't see the moments when I nearly lost everything. Not just financially, but personally. And sometimes I wonder," he paused, staring into his coffee, "I wonder if I'm building an empire only to find myself alone at the top." Gabriella's heart tightened. His words mirrored her own private fears in a way she hadn't expected. She leaned forward, her voice soft but steady. "You're not alone in that feeling. Maybe the details are different, but the struggle, The struggle is the same. We all carry battles no one else sees. He looked at her then, truly looked, and in his eyes she saw a flicker of recognition. It was as though in that moment they weren't CEO and employee, millionaire and coordinator. They were simply two souls, both weary from life's hidden wars, finding solace in the rare honesty of each other's company. From that night forward, something shifted between them. Nathan no longer looked at Gabriella merely as a competent employee. He sought her thoughts more often, not just in meetings but in quiet conversations. He asked about her perspective on leadership, on resilience, on how people find strength when circumstances crush them. And Gabriella, though cautious, began to open up bit by bit, sharing fragments of her own story. Not everything, not yet, but enough for him to see that her empathy was born not from naivete, but from lived experience. Each exchange left Gabriella torn. On one hand, she feared the consequences of blurring the lines between professional respect and personal connection. On the other, she felt a growing sense of purpose, as though her presence in Nathan's life was not an accident but part of something larger, something meaningful. And while the office continued with its usual noise, projects, deadlines, gossip, beneath it all a quiet thread bound them together. Two people who carried hidden struggles, two people who found in each other not judgment but understanding. What Gabriella did not yet realize was that this bond, fragile and new, would soon be tested in ways neither of them could anticipate. For life has a way of revealing truths at the very moment we think we are safest. And both she and Nathan were standing at the edge of revelations that would change them forever. The turning point, the weeks that followed their late-night coffee conversation began to reshape Gabriella's world in ways she could scarcely comprehend. What had once been a routine existence, arrive, work, go home, repeat, now carried the thrill of anticipation, the awareness of a connection growing silently between herself and Nathan. It was not loud, not rushed, not careless. It was subtle, unspoken, yet undeniable. Every interaction seemed laced with layers deeper than surface-level conversations. Each time Nathan sought her opinion in meetings, her colleagues might have thought it was professional courtesy, but Gabriella felt the weight of it, the way his gaze lingered a second longer than necessary, the way his questions weren't simply about metrics but about her perspective, her values, her truth. Gabriella found herself in a strange paradox. On one hand, she wanted to shrink into invisibility, to hide from the intensity of his attention lest anyone notice the spark building between them. On the other, she felt more alive than she had in years. For the first time since her father's death, she felt as though someone truly saw her, not as a dutiful daughter, not as a reliable employee, but as Gabriella, a woman with dreams, scars, and worth beyond measure. That recognition ignited something she had long buried. Hope. Hope that her life could be more than survival. Hope that love and purpose could exist even for someone like her. Yet the universe has a way of testing hope the moment it begins to bloom. And Gabriella's test arrived one Thursday morning in the form of whispers that slithered through the office like smoke. She had barely settled at her desk when a colleague leaned in with a smirk. "You seem to be in good favor with the boss these days." The comment was casual, but the implication was not. By noon, the whispers had multiplied. Snide remarks disguised as jokes, curious glances in the break room. A few even suggested she was advancing in the company not by merit but by charm. Gabriella's chest tightened with dread. She had worked tirelessly to build her reputation on professionalism, yet in a matter of days, gossip threatened to reduce her to nothing more than speculation about her relationship with Nathan. She wanted to scream that her work spoke for itself, that her late nights, her creativity, her perseverance had earned her recognition. But gossip was a wildfire. Once sparked, it spread recklessly, feeding on assumption rather than truth. That afternoon, she sat frozen at her desk, staring at her computer screen without reading a word. Fear gnawed at her. If Nathan heard the rumors, and of course he would he think less of her? Would he distance himself, not out of disinterest but out of necessity? She had worked too hard to let her career unravel because of whispers she could not control. Her fears were confirmed when, at 5 p.m., her phone buzzed with a message from Nathan. "See me in my office before you leave." Her stomach dropped. She walked the now familiar path to his glass-walled office, each step heavier than the last. When she entered, he was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the skyline as though lost in thought. "Close the door." he said quietly. She obeyed, her pulse pounding. Is everything all right? He turned then, his expression unreadable. You've heard the talk, I assume. She swallowed hard. Yes. His jaw tightened slightly. I don't care about rumors, Gabriella. I care about the truth. But I need to know, does this bother you? Her voice cracked with suppressed emotion. Of course it bothers me. I've worked so hard to be respected for my work, not reduced to gossip. I don't want to be a distraction for you or for this company. Nathan studied her for a long moment, then crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped just a breath away, his presence filling the space between them. You are not a distraction, he said firmly. You are one of the most brilliant people in this building, and anyone who suggests otherwise reveals more about their own insecurities than about you. Let them talk. We know the truth. Her eyes stung with tears she fought to suppress. But what if it damages your reputation? You're the CEO. People expect perfection, distance. He cut her off gently. People will always talk, Gabriella. When I succeed, they say I'm ruthless. When I fail, they say I'm careless. When I hire a young, talented woman and value her input, they say it must be personal. I stopped living for their approval long ago. The only approval that matters is mine and yours. The intensity in his gaze made her breath hitch. His words were not just reassurance. They were a declaration. In that moment, Gabriella realized that Nathan was not merely protecting her from rumors. He was challenging her to rise above them, to recognize her own worth beyond the shallow judgments of others. Still, doubt lingered in her. I don't know if I'm strong enough to face this, she admitted softly. Nathan's expression softened. He reached out not to touch her, but to let his hand hover close as though offering strength without forcing it upon her. Strength isn't about never feeling afraid. It's about standing even when fear tries to break you, and I know you are stronger than you realize. The words struck deep. For years, Gabriella had carried the weight of her family, her responsibilities, her grief. Yet she had never seen herself as strong. She had seen herself as surviving, enduring, coping. But Nathan's words reframed her story. She was not just surviving, she was strong. She had been all along. That night, Gabriella lay awake replaying the conversation. For the first time, she felt the beginnings of a transformation within herself. The gossip still hurt, the stares still burned, but Nathan's belief in her sparked something far greater. Self-belief. And self-belief, once ignited, could not be easily extinguished. The turning point came a week later during a high-stakes presentation to Sterling's board of directors. Gabriella had been asked to present alongside Nathan, a rare opportunity that placed her in front of the most powerful figures in the company. She should have been terrified, and she was, but she also felt something else. Determination. She remembered Nathan's words. Strength isn't about never feeling afraid. With that mantra echoing in her mind, she stood before the board and delivered her portion with clarity, passion, and unwavering confidence. When she finished, the room erupted in murmurs of approval. One of the senior directors leaned forward and said, "Impressive work, Ms. Martinez, innovative and grounded. You've clearly done your homework." Gabriella glanced at Nathan, who gave her the slightest nod, his pride evident in his eyes. It was in that moment she realized the rumors no longer mattered. Her work spoke louder than gossip. Her courage spoke louder than doubt. And Nathan's faith in her had given her the courage to find faith in herself. After the meeting, as they walked out together, Nathan leaned close and whispered, "See? I told you, you're stronger than you think." Her smile was small but radiant. Maybe. Or maybe I just have the right person reminding me. Nathan's eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, the professional walls between them seemed to crumble, leaving only two people who had found in each other not just connection but transformation. And though challenges still loomed, whispers that would not die easily, trials that neither of them yet foresaw, Gabriella knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the woman who hid behind routine and silence. She was stepping into her strength, her voice, her worth, and that perhaps was the most unexpected turning point of all. The resolution. The winter wind swept through the city streets, rattling windows and stirring leaves into swirling eddies. Yet inside the towering glass walls of Sterling Enterprises, the air was filled with a different kind of storm, one that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Gabriella could feel it in the way people whispered in corners, in the way conversations hushed the moment she entered a room, in the way her every movement seemed to be observed, measured, and interpreted. The rumors had not died easily. They rarely do. But Gabriella had changed. She no longer let the whispers define her, no longer shrank into invisibility. Each morning she arrived with her head high, her work polished, her ideas bold. She had learned that the best way to silence doubt was not with denial but with undeniable excellence. Nathan had been a constant presence through it all, not hovering, not protecting her like a fragile glass ornament, but standing beside her as an equal, challenging her to rise to her own potential. He did not shield her from scrutiny, nor did he dismiss her struggles. Instead, he looked at her with the kind of steady assurance that said, "I see you, I believe in you, and I will not let you forget your worth." That silent message had carried her through long days and longer nights, but every story reaches a point when challenges collide with destiny, and Gabriella's moment came sooner than she expected. Sterling Enterprises was preparing for the biggest campaign in its history, an ambitious global project that could elevate the company to new heights or bring it crashing down under the weight of its own expectations. Nathan had placed Gabriella at the heart of it, giving her responsibilities that stretched beyond her official role. It was a risk, and everyone knew it. Some directors openly questioned his decision. "She's young," they muttered. "Unproven. We need someone seasoned." Yet Nathan's answer had been firm and unwavering. "She has the vision we need. Experience can be learned. Vision cannot." The pressure was immense. Gabriella poured every ounce of her energy into the campaign, working late nights, fine-tuning every detail, motivating her team with a quiet determination that inspired even the most skeptical colleagues. But with each passing day, she also battled her own fears that she might fail, that she might prove the doubters right, that she might let Nathan down. One evening, exhausted and alone in the dim glow of her apartment, Gabriella sat surrounded by drafts and sketches. Her hands trembled from fatigue, her mind clouded with doubt. For the first time in weeks, the weight of it all threatened to crush her spirit. Tears stung her eyes as she whispered into the silence, "What if I'm not enough?" The next morning, she walked into the office still carrying that heaviness, but fate had a way of offering reminders when most needed. Nathan called her into his office. He studied her carefully, his sharp eyes softening as he spoke. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." She tried to smile, but it faltered. "Maybe I am. What if I fail, Nathan? What if this doesn't work?" He leaned forward, his voice steady and calm. "Do you know the difference between those who succeed and those who don't? It isn't that the successful never fail. It's that they refuse to stop trying when they do. Failure is not the enemy, Gabriella. Fear is. And I've watched you long enough to know you are not a woman who lets fear win." The words struck her like a spark in the dark. Nathan wasn't giving her a pep talk. He was speaking truth into her soul. Truth she had forgotten. She wasn't here by accident. She wasn't carrying this responsibility because of luck or favoritism. She was here because she had earned it. Because she was capable. Because she was strong. The day of the campaign launch arrived with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. The boardroom was filled with directors, investors, and partners from around the globe. Cameras flashed, documents rustled, the air thick with expectation. Gabriella stood at the front, her hands resting on the podium, her heart pounding like a drum. For a moment, the weight of all those eyes pressed heavily against her chest, but then she saw Nathan in the corner, watching her with that steady gaze that had anchored her through storms. And she remembered his words, "Fear is the enemy." She began to speak. Her voice was steady, her words clear. She unveiled the campaign not as a collection of numbers and graphs, but as a story. One that spoke of resilience, innovation, and vision. She painted a picture that wasn't just about products or profits, but about people, about the power of connection, about the belief that behind every number was a human being whose life could be touched. She spoke with passion, not because she was trying to impress, but because she believed in what she was presenting. When she finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then came the applause, slow at first, then building into a wave of approval that filled the air. Directors nodded, investors exchanged approving glances, and one of the most skeptical board members even rose to shake her hand. "Remarkable," he said. "Truly remarkable." Gabriella felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back, allowing only a radiant smile to break across her face. She had done it. Not only had she proven herself to others, she had proven herself to herself. That evening, as the office buzzed with celebration, Gabriella slipped away to the quiet of the rooftop terrace. She stood beneath the winter sky, the city lights glittering like stars below, and allowed herself a moment to breathe, to take it all in. She had walked through fire and come out stronger. Nathan joined her moments later, his presence calm and grounding. He didn't speak at first, simply stood beside her, the silence between them comfortable and full. Finally, he said softly, "I knew you could do it." She turned to him, her eyes shimmering. "I wasn't sure I could, but you made me believe." He shook his head gently. "No, Gabriella. I reminded you of what was already there. The strength, the vision, the courage, it was always yours. Don't give me credit for what belongs to you." Her heart swelled at his words, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly see what this journey had given her. It wasn't just recognition or success, it was transformation. She had stepped out of the shadows of fear and into the light of her own worth. Nathan reached for her hand then, not as a CEO claiming an employee, not as a millionaire flaunting power, but as a man reaching for a woman who had touched his life in ways he hadn't expected. Their fingers intertwined, and in that simple gesture was the acknowledgement of all they had endured together. The whispers, the struggles, the doubts, and the promise of what was yet to come. The world would still talk. It always would. But as Gabriella stood beneath the city lights with Nathan's hand in hers, she realized it no longer mattered. She had found her voice, her strength, her worth, and in doing so she had found something even rarer, a love built not on illusion or convenience, but on truth, respect, and shared resilience. As they stood together in the quiet of the night, Gabriella whispered the words that had carried her through every storm, "I am enough." And for the first time she not only believed it, she knew it.